This is Pass the Mic, a podcast produced by the alumnus of the ELI program presented by the FACM. I feel like I need to define some acronyms here. So ELI is the Emerging Leader Institute presented by the Foundation for the Alliance for Community Media. I'm one of your hosts today, Tom Keppler, manager of Brunswick Area Television, where we are today. I have a co-host here next to me. This is Ben Staunton. How are you today here in the beautiful city of Brunswick, Ohio?
I'm very good, Tom.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking. And how are you?
I'm pretty good. I appreciate the question. So who are we talking to today on this episode?
Well, today we're talking to Rowe. And, many of you may recognize him because he's been involved in community media for quite some time. So before we get started on that, Ross, let's talk a little bit about where you're at today. Where are you calling us from?
I am at home in Elgin, Illinois, which is about 35 miles northwest of Chicago.
Nice.
So you have an extensive career. You're recently retired, is that right?
Yes, I retired last December after I've spent the last 23 years at the village of Elk Grove Village, running their government access channel. But as you said before, I've been doing this. I hate to really even say it out loud, but it's been 48 years.
Wow.
So,
That takes dedication.
yes, no doubt. But I've enjoyed it. It's always been fun.
That goes a long way when you enjoy what you do. How much of that 48 years was a position of leadership or management?
Pretty much all of it. When I was in college at Michigan State, my first position was a master control operator at the East Lansing Public Schools cable channel. And I told myself that, I was going to do this until I found a real TV job. I had been freelancing. I freelanced for ESPN and for ABC and doing mostly sports. Then I got a job for United Cable Television at the East Lansing Public Access Channel, which is WELM. I was promoted. My boss moved on about 6 months after that, and I was promoted into her position, and the rest is history. It's pretty much all management after that.
Okay, that worked out pretty well for you.
It did.
I'm glad to hear it. We're celebrating 40 years here. Ben's been uploading some of the old archive shows. So I like hearing that, how you got started and the motivation and how you started off with the school. And has it all been government access or public access or educational or a little bit of everything?
It's been a little bit of everything. It's mostly been public access. I've been doing government for the last, 32 years. I spent 9 years at the village of Mount Prospect, Illinois, which is not very far from here. I did a stint at the secondary PBS station in Chicago. I did a stint there as program director. But other than that, it's been all community television since 1978.
So why don't you tell us a little bit, like the differences that you've found between community media and public broadcasting? What were the big difference that you saw between the two?
Well, the public broadcasting is kind of a misnomer because it's not, it's government sponsored, and it's a collection of different stations and different different entities who produce their own programming, and then PBS would distribute it, basically. Um, the difference between that and community access is that the programming, for the most part, is produced by the community. And th- by doing that, a lot of stories, local stories, can be covered and created. Um, so you get a really good look at what's going on in your community. And that makes, that makes it much more personal. A very good friend of mine and the guy who dragged me into this uh,
Such a
community
positive
access
way to put
thing.
it. Dragged me into
Yeah,
this.
yeah. Randy Van Dalsen. He once said that people know more about what's going on in the Middle East than they do in their own neighborhoods. And it's true. Community media is definitely a way to close that gap, to make it so you're just as informed as you are about national things. For example, I remember one time when they decided to pave my street, and there was no warning whatsoever. One day I walked out and there's bulldozers and everything else, and I had no idea that was going to happen. And that happens to a lot of us, not the way it used to, of course, but your world, at least for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, changes. And community television was one of the ways you could get that information.
People hear public access and they don't necessarily understand what we're doing. Is there anything that maybe we could clear up for the audience?
There are a lot of, uh, you know, there's a lot of confusion still after all this time about the connection to, using community access as compared to uh, the uh, the social media or websites, things like that. Uh, people people, while it's great for one-on-one or one-on-two uh, communication, uh, getting the word out to your community as a whole, uh, there is no distribution built into that. And so, maybe somebody who if you put out a social media message, say on Facebook, well, who's going to get it? Well, most of them are just going to be people who subscribe to your feed. And that's kind of where it ends. So I think it's important. I think both of those ways of communicating are important. Um, try to, during my whole career, I've tried to cover all the bases, you know, not just the TV channel, but streaming and, Facebook and Instagram and places like that. So I can get the word out to as many people as possible.
Oh, I love that answer. Uh, would you say that's one of the biggest things that's changed throughout the course of your career? Because we're pretty good at adapting here. We always have to keep on top of it. But I'm just curious if there's any other aspects, in your opinion, that have changed that you've needed to adapt over the years of your career.
Oh yeah, yeah. One of the things I like to say is that um, the changes that have happened in technology, specifically phones and phone cameras and streaming and things like that, have favored, I think, community media centers because we're small, because we're very focused. It's much easier for us to shift positions when we have to. People were saying when Facebook and YouTube and other services like that started, they said, well, you can do the same thing on YouTube. So um, why bother to have a TV channel? I think that's short-sighted to think about that because you want to cover as much as you can to get as many people as you can to watch. It is, Nielsen doesn't rate uh, local cable programming. So without that kind of feedback, using, see how many likes you get, um, or how many viewers are watching, has become so much more important.
This is like a two-part question. So first of all, would you recommend somebody going into community access still today? And second of all, if so, what kind of guidance would you give them to have a long storied career such as you?
Well, um, besides, there's always the technical aspect, uh, which people are more and more in tune to, by doing things like this podcast or, um, even just shooting personal video with your phone. Um, I like to think that I am serving the community uh, by helping tell their stories that normally would not be told in larger stations. Um, it gives it that personal touch that those stations may not be able to or may not want to do. So many of if you watch the news these days from broadcast stations, so many of them spend a lot of time doing international stories, or they're doing um, stories that are, for example, here in Chicago, um, the local stations, usually are leading off with either uh, high, crime stories, or they're leading off with international stories. Supposedly bringing a local connection to those big stories, but not necessarily. Basically, they're still reporting on the same stuff that NBC News or or ABC or any other network you can get that information from. Community media's advantage in that is that it is true local perspective. It is what's happening here in our community right now. I started out in broadcast, um, and I enjoyed it, even though you know it's tied directly, in a lot of cases, it's tied directly to how much advertising you can sell, which is understandable and a shame at the same time, uh, because you're not going to do in-depth coverage if you don't necessarily give yourself time to do it. Um, so community media can dig into stories and news that is more focused on local residents and their lives, their stories, what's happening with them, rather than, you know, something happening in the Middle East or Europe or whatever.
So would you say that that aspect of broadcast media hinders the process and the creativity?
I think it makes it harder, certainly. Um, but I think one of the things I tried to do during my career is to get producers to focus on the local story. You know, how are things, uh, affecting us? For example, where I worked in Elk Grove Village, uh, Elk Grove is the second largest data center um, town in the country. Only Virginia has more um, data data centers than Elk Grove Village. For Elk Grove, it's been a good thing. In other places, as you know, it's been a different story. The folks in Elk Grove have figured it out, and so we did some extensive video about the data centers and how they, how Elk Grove Village has managed to solve the problem that is happening now in other communities around the country. So um, I think that's a really good example.
Sure. Yeah, the local voice there. You mentioned guiding producers. I'm curious, throughout the course of your career, would you say you guided more employee producers or like volunteer producers? Because every station I speak with it has a little bit of each, or it's a little bit different. There's nuances. So, what's been your experience?
I think it's a combination. I'd say it was about very close to 50-50,
Okay.
because uh, community media centers should, if you have uh, in-house producers, you use them to fill in the gaps that maybe the community isn't uh, covering or forget to cover or um, or miss out on. A lot of the programming that happens with in-house producers are usually things like festivals, parades, um, and things of government coverage of government meetings and events and things like that. That normal, community producers who are much more self-focused. They're focused on, you know, their thoughts and their opinions, and so I think it makes your center a lot more well-rounded if you have a combination of both.
Yeah, you get unique perspectives that way. I agree completely.
Absolutely. Is there a program that you worked on that stands out in your mind that is probably one of the shining lights in your career?
Mm, there have been so many.
Oh, go ahead. We
One of
got
the
time.
things.
List them
Yeah,
off.
yeah, let us hear.
Okay,
We'd love to
well,
know.
all right.
No, however you want to
Um,
approach it, you're all good.
we, well, for example, in my last position, we started doing a lot of live junior high and high school sports. And we did them because nobody else wanted to do them. And because we had a built in audience, which is the parents and relatives and grandparents of the kids who are participating in those events. Um, I remember getting a call from a woman in Florida, a grandmother whose granddaughter was playing girls basketball at Elk Grove High School. And she wanted to thank us for doing that coverage because she didn't, she was at a point, unfortunately, in her life where she couldn't travel as much as she used to, and it was great to be able to watch her granddaughter play on these different teams, and that's a great example of you know our coverage making connections, not just within the community, but within families. You know, um, there. I think that is something that is, it's very personal. It can be very personal. And I think it's a good thing. Let's see, other stuff. Well, I used to be involved with a program in East Lansing that was an arts program. It was a show that was done by local artists, and they would actually do visual art on camera. So it wasn't necessarily a profile of the artist, it was the art itself that was featured. Um, and that was pretty cool. I did some, when I was in Fort Wayne, I did some programming with the Fort Wayne Dance Collective. Where we would, again, it was about the art and not necessarily profiles of the people, although we would do that as well. Um, but the idea is that these were performances that maybe people couldn't get to or see, but they were able to watch our channel and see the arts programming that was available. And again, that was always a really good success.
Yeah. What I heard there is there's a lot of positive impact. So from grandma to the artists to the to the athletes, everybody, that's nothing but good is what I heard there.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and it's also positive for the people watching because, like you said, if it's a medium that's not being met, and there's people who are starving for it, then why can't it be brought to them? What is wrong with being able to see everything and being able to experience it as opposed to it being pushed to the back? Let's bring it up and people can watch it as well.
Exactly.
Through all your years in community media, what has stuck with you? Like, what leadership lessons did you learn that maybe you could pass on to some of us emerging leaders?
Well, I think first of all, you have to keep an ear to the ground about what's going on in the community. You need to make yourself as familiar with government, government officials, government programs, nonprofits that are in your community, those who can't necessarily afford to do any sort of PR outlet, outreach or anything like that, to let your community members know that services are available.
I'd like to thank you for all of your work with the Alliance for Community Media, because I believe before the show you said you were on the board. How long was that?
12 years altogether.
Yeah.
I had 2 stints.
That's a lot of dedication right there. So I think it's interesting through the ELI and through the Alliance, just being able to collaborate and hear like, oh, here's something we all do in common. Here's something maybe we could do a little better that they're doing somewhere else. So
that's the greatest thing about ACM is that you connect with other people who are doing similar things in their communities. And I freely admit that I've stolen stuff from them.
You were inspired by. I use that term. I was inspired by.
That does sound a lot better, doesn't it? Learn techniques that maybe you haven't thought about before, because a lot of times, a lot of people who are in my position kind of operated as if they were an island, and that, sometimes didn't know where to turn for assistance. And ACM was definitely, and still is, the best way to get that type of information and talk to and network with people who are going through basically the same thing you are. It's always important to me to, you know, if you wanted to get, if people wanted to get involved in their community, actually, Community X Media is a great way to do it. You can learn a skill and you can make an impact. And I think that is fantastic myself.
I think we agree as well, right, Ben?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we'll close out the show right there. I'd like to thank
Okay.
everybody for tuning in to the Pass the Mic podcast presented by ELI with the Foundation for the Alliance of Community Media. We learned all about Ross Rowe and your exciting career and your leadership abilities. And man, I liked everything, the positive impact you provided at all the places you were at. If this were an interview, I would hire you. That's how good your answers are.
Thank you. Thank you. That's good to hear. If I get, I've been retired for 6 months, so if I get really bored, I'll
I was
give
about
you
to
a
say,
call.
you can get back in the game. Use this video as your reference. You're
Sure. It's always been fun, so,
We can show you and introduce you to the beautiful community of Brunswick right here.
there you go.
Ohio.
So, Ross, I'd like to thank you not only for your years of dedication, but for joining us here today on Pass the Mic. So, thank you.
It is my pleasure. Thank you very much for letting me spill my guts about why community media is the greatest thing ever.